What if there's a deeper knowledge that we can gain in our physical lives that is going to aid us when we cross over so that our ability for our soul to be curious about things that are far greater, far more interesting, far more unique to the physical life? What if we're just evolving finally to the point to where we can understand that and our physical experience, our physical minds have evolved enough? We've got enough basis and foundational understanding that we could go, you know what, there's more for us to share with each other in this physical life. So that way, when we get through this life and we get to the other side, we know, hey, when I first cross over, oh, I should be curious about
Mm.
everything. I should be curious about the things that are most important for me, not just wondering and being fearful of, well, am I going to go to this place or am I going to go to that place? In 2019, I went in for a rather invasive dental procedure. And in the process of preparing for the procedure and getting me ready to basically be not fully sedated, but comfortable, I guess is a great way to put it, I started to have this really unusual reaction to what I was given to prepare for the procedure. I basically popped out of my body completely. I now was in the ceiling of the dentist office looking down at my body in the dental chair. My soul, the part of us that is our truest self, that is not our physical body, the infinite, all knowing aspect of who we are, flipped over. And I was now, I'm in the ceiling, but now I'm like, the tiles of the ceiling are inches away from where I am. And I am just in absolute awe. So imagine that you are experiencing something that is incredibly breathtaking and awe inspiring for the first time. From my perspective, through whatever eyes of my soul I was looking through, it was as if I couldn't see anything but love and beauty with everything that I looked at. So imagine the soul as the prism, and imagine the physical body as the color that gets represented from that prism. The soul itself acts as a way to create an individual experience, a, a way to say that I am different than you and you're different than somebody else. At some point, this physical existence goes away. We all, at some point, no longer exist physically. That doesn't mean that the white light ever goes away. The white light remains, even if the prism and where the prism was reflecting the individual color is no longer able to reflect that color into the physical experience. It can then turn itself, if it would like, and reflect it into something else. So we are still all part of one, but yet we are all individual when you take it and refract it, if you will. And when our physical body goes away, the light doesn't go away. It just returns back to the oneness.
This is Nick Hyam from thewholenessofexperience.com. You're listening to the Nonduality podcast. In this episode, Paul Dobson speaks with Anastasia Wesselink Moellering.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on our show, Anastasia. Really appreciate you taking the time to come onto the Non-Duality podcast and have a chat. Yeah,
For
it's great
having
to
me.
have you here. Yeah, you're absolutely welcome. So I came across your NDE online and I just found it absolutely fascinating, and it resonated with some really interesting experiences I've had in my life. And yeah, I just wanted to sort of ask you about it and get to know a bit more about what happens. So I guess let's start at the beginning. Let's start with what actually happened on the NDE and go from there, I guess.
Yeah, so in 2019, I went in for a rather invasive dental procedure. And in the process of preparing for the procedure and getting me ready to basically be not fully sedated, but comfortable, I guess is a great way to put it, um, I started to have this really unusual. At first, I thought it was just normal reaction to what I was given to prepare for the procedure. But as the dentist got me set up and stepped away to the side to prepare everything that the dentist was doing, I started to get this really unusual sensation in my body. Now, the best way I can explain it would be if you could imagine when you breathe in, like feeling like your body is kind of lifting up off the table. And then when you're exhaling, feeling like it is falling back into itself. And it was kind of an unusual sensation. And I felt this pressure building up that was rather uncomfortable in my body. But again, having never done anything like this before, I just kind of chalked it up. And I'm kind of just a laid back person, anyways. All right, we'll just kind of let this go because eventually the dentist is going to get started. Everything's going to be fine. But eventually, what ended up happening was I took another breath. And instead of my body just floating, what felt like floating up above my body, I basically popped out of my body completely. And instead of just feeling the sensation, I now was in the ceiling of the dentist office looking down at my body in the dental chair. And at this point, a number of really unusual kind of awarenesses, or I call them thoughts, but they were more kind of curiosities or knowings at this point. And what's so hard about describing this experience from this point on is there was no time. And so while I talk about everything as one thing before another, in my experience, it all happened all at the same time. So the first thing that I did was I said to myself, what am I doing up here? And up here, meaning in the ceiling, looking down at my body, because I had no idea why I went from there to the ceiling. But what was the kind of the aha or the knowing of that statement that I said to myself in that place was that I recognized and acknowledged that, wait a minute, I'm not down there in my physical body. I'm up here in the ceiling looking down at what looks to be a physical body. And I don't identify with that body at all. I identify the I that I said, what am I doing? Was whatever you would call that part of me that was in the ceiling looking down at the physical body. And I had this brief wondering of, am I dead? And with these two things, there was just this like explosion of knowing that happened within me that we are not our physical bodies. Whatever the we is or the I that we would acknowledge isn't a physical experience. It is something that's far bigger, far greater. And with that, I call it the soul. So I will preface this. I will use the term soul for the rest of my kind of story.
Sure.
I just don't like the term though.
Okay.
I feel like soul has so many different beliefs tied to it. It has so many different, even, philosophies and religious background. And because of that, every person who hears that word is going to kind of have a different definition of what a soul is.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so, for the purpose of how I'm going to describe it, I'm going to say it's the part of us that is our truest self, that is not our physical body. It's the infinite, all knowing aspect of who we are. So, layer on any other additional beliefs you have to that. But as far as how I acknowledge the soul, that's how I define it. So, from that point, my soul flipped over. And I was now, I'm in the ceiling, but now I'm like, the tiles of the ceiling are inches away from where I am. And I am just in absolute awe. So imagine that you are experiencing something that is incredibly breathtaking and awe-inspiring for the first time. That was my reaction to the dust in the panels of the ceiling.
Wow.
It was as if I was looking at them through the eyes of beauty and love. And it didn't matter that, from our physical perspective, we would look at dust or a ceiling tile and be like, okay, whatever. Like I got to go clean that. But from my perspective, through whatever eyes of my soul I was looking through, it was as if I couldn't see anything but love and beauty with everything that I looked at. And so, this minute, mundane aspect of dust in a ceiling tile held this beauty that just filled me up in a way that to this day, I can't think of anything that I've seen in my physical life that had created such an amazing feeling within me. And I've seen some pretty remarkable places.
Yeah. Wow.
So, with that, it was like I say, my eyes closed, or the shutter closed, or the aperture closed, whatever you want to call it. And I left the dentist office and I was no longer there. And when I opened my eyes, I was in this place of complete darkness. And I really want to set the tone before I further describe this, because when you hear something complete darkness or void, which is what a lot of people call this place, afterwards, I found there was some terminologies to the things that I experienced, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I was in this place of complete darkness, but it wasn't scary. It was full of love and bliss and peace and completeness. And it was as if in this place, all the knowing of everything that has ever been known was suddenly available. And I felt myself as the soul part of me being absolutely at one with this totality. And so I ended up calling it the oneness. I know, oneness. It's not very unique. It's nothing stellar, but it seemed to be the only word we have available in our vocabulary that really defines, at least for what we know now, how there can be something that represents everything in singularity, but yet we can still acknowledge that each of our souls are a part of it. So it's single and it has a singularity, but it also has components that are a part of it. So I call it the oneness. And in this place, it was immediately known to me that this oneness represents everything. It represents every soul, again, using that term as I've defined it, that has ever and will ever exist, and that we are all a part of it. It is absolute unconditional love in a way that defies how we would describe love. It is a completeness of being, it is a state of existence. It isn't an emotional peak or valley. It is who we truly are. And I realized that I'm a part of it, that we're all a part of it. And there was this ability. I say it's almost like I could see through the eyes of every soul, but it wasn't like I was seeing individual situations or circumstances or people's lives. It was as if I was acknowledging the fact that it all existed there and it was all there at one time, because again, there was no time in this place. And as I was expanding, is the best way I could put it, I was expanding into this oneness. I reflect back now on it, and I've tried to put better words to it, because this has been almost, it'll be 5 years in a month. It'll be 5 years. And initially I had a very hard time trying to define this, but now it is as if my soul spent moments there, because there's no time, I expanded into the oneness and I became more and more a part of it. And I became less invested in the physical identity that I came from. Right. It's as if I could acknowledge that I was an individual, but I didn't care about it, because there, the all-encompassing love and infinite knowing was who I really was. The Anastasia in this physical body. I had this great experience in the physical life, but it really didn't have, I mean, I don't want to say I didn't care about it, because that care wasn't even a factor in this place. This was more, I didn't have any ties to it, because it would have been so limiting to only care about that in relation to the infinite nature of what I was recognizing I'm a part of.
Hmm.
And so I found it that I couldn't, as I was expanding into this, I found myself like being so curious and so rapidly like inquiring to everything, that the part of me that was the Anastasia that had the limited access to knowing was suddenly wanting to expand out of and know everything that was available to me. So I had this curiosity about so many things, like, who are we, why, what's this existence, where am I mean, all of these things, but they were rapid fire. And they weren't thoughts. They were simply just this part of me that recognized that all of that knowing is here and it is a part of me, but by being curious, I could access it. And
Hmm.
I've come to define it kind of, curiosity versus asking a question, as being very different in that place. Because if I were to ask a question there, it would almost be having a belief or stating that somehow there's something unanswered. Like a question represents a lack of knowing. But
Mhm.
in this place, everything is known because it's completeness, it's a oneness. And because everything is known, you can't ask a question. You can only be curious about it, because by that it's almost like it creates this sort of like beacon for you to be able to access that knowing with your curiosity.
Wow.
I have no idea how long I was in this place. It could have been fractions of a second, it could have been minutes. I know it wasn't more than likely 5 to, I'd say maybe 8 minutes most, just based off of what happened when I came back. But I found myself immediately snapped back into my physical body. So I was there. I had this profound experience of accessing all of this knowing immediately available to me. And when I snapped back into my body, I remember my first physical thought being, no, 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 go back, go back, go back. And I felt like there was this desire to pull all of this knowing back into my physical body, and recognizing that there were some things that I connected to that were beyond my physical brain's capacity to comprehend. And it was like sands flowing through my mental filter, trying to pull it all in, but yet I couldn't. And there was this aperture, again, it's the best way I could explain it, that was closing. And as it closed, I was desperately trying to bring the knowing with me. And there was really one very strong, very clear knowing that I was able to hold on to in my physical body before that aperture completely closed. And that was that our physical bodies that we walk around in, that our soul drives around, is nothing more than a sensory tool. It is simply a sensory tool for the soul to understand what it is like to have a physical experience. And that there is absolutely 100%, and I know this statement gets me in trouble, but I'm going to say it because it's the truth of my experience. There is absolutely no getting this life wrong. Not in a way that translates to what we experience after we leave our physical bodies, because our physical bodies are simply that. They are a collection of our genetic ancestors and experiences. They're a collection of how we're programmed and conditioned as we're raised, and the beliefs that we're given through the communities and groups we're a part of. The physical body itself is not our soul. The soul, rather, is trying to be in the driver's seat of the physical body. It is trying to be as integrated into the physical body as possible so that it can have all of the sensory experiences that are available through the sensory tools that are the physical body, the sights, the sounds, the feelings, the thought process, all of these things that we experience from a sensory perspective is what the soul wants to understand and experience. Not because we have to be in a school with lessons to learn so that the soul can evolve. It's actually quite the contrary. The soul is already complete. There is nothing that our physical bodies can experience that's going to add anything else to our soul. It is the physical body, our physical experience that is benefited from, that grows, that has the capacity to expand its experience by allowing the soul into the physical experience. And so when I came back with this knowing, I it was so clear, and it's so hard to describe because it's a knowing. It's not a mental understanding. It's not a thought process. It's not like, when you learn something, when you learn it, you have to go through these mental processes in order to truly understand and remember what you're learning. But when you know something, you don't go through that mental process. It actually lives in a different place within you. And that's what this knowing was, this knowing that we are not our physical bodies, that there is no good or bad. There are no lessons to learn in this physical life in a way that translates to what we experience in the afterlife, that there is no time, that we are part, all of us, a part of this oneness. We are all absolutely complete on the soul level. And if we could just let ourselves be curious, like our soul's curious within that place of all knowing, then it taps us into a part of ourselves that is our soul, that does have access to that all knowing, to allow that knowing to come into our physical experience. Now, at this point, I'm in the dental chair, completely uninterested and could care less about what's about ready to happen to me. All I want is to go back to this place that my soul was just at. Now, after this experience, I want to fast forward a little bit. After this experience, I started researching because I had no words to describe what had happened to me or what I experienced. And it took me down a rabbit hole of, oh, there's this thing called a near-death experience. There's the International Association of Near-Death Studies, which I immediately, once I started learning these terminologies, there's out-of-body experience, there's astral projection. There are all of these different elements of what we can experience that's beyond our physical body. And through working with IONS and being invited to speak at their conference, I landed on describing it as a near-death experience. And that was really early on. I want to say that was probably 2 or 3 years after it happened, that I had landed on that definition through the help of these groups and the people that I had connected to. There's a lot of debate of, well, did your heart stop? Were you on a monitor? Can you prove that you died and you had this experience? I was not connected to a heart monitor. There's no, record that I could say, from a medical perspective, my heart stopped and here's my, certificate of death, so to speak. What I will say though, is that from what we know right now, there are a number of things that are kind of under the umbrella of what we would call a near-death experience. And there's a number of things that researchers have compiled to say this is what we define as a near-death. I believe when I was tested, I was 9 out of 10 of those. So that's how we landed on the term near death. So I just want to clarify that because I know that's
Sure.
a lot of times a question that gets asked.
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective, call it whatever you want. I mean, I'm not tied to that. What I find lends itself to that term, or really, I guess, any term, is it makes it easier to try to put the experience into a way for people to understand it initially. So there's another term that has come out. I think it's called near-death-like experience, which fits for people who have all of the markers or criteria, the diagnostic criteria of a near-death experience, but don't have a record of the fact that their heart actually stopped. So whether it does or doesn't, there are people that don't have that record. So again, that's kind of the background behind how we landed on this term. But again, from my perspective, the experience itself is so profound that even to label it anything is limiting. To put a label on anything is limiting, but we need it as physical beings.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it doesn't particularly matter to me either. If you've gone into that place where there's just absolute knowing, it doesn't really matter what we call that. You've experienced something that you know is absolutely real.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no, I assume there's no doubt for you whatsoever that what you experience is just absolutely like just doubtless. And yeah, there's no doubts about what happened there whatsoever. It was, you just felt like
Mm-hmm.
this is a real thing I've come into contact with. This is what we are, and it's just yeah, not able
Yeah,
to even have a doubt about that.
it has, and it would be an understatement to say it has completely changed the course of my life.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. There's we'll come back to that. There's one thing I wanted to ask you, which was you said about this, you became a part of everything. Uh, so I think a lot of people have an idea of oneness, you could say, like, there's there's like non-dual traditions and, Advaita Vedanta and various Eastern traditions that have an idea of God or the self as like
Mhm.
this kind of almost blanket oneness. It's you just dissolve into the big ocean or whatever. That's not been actually my experience, but I just wanted to talk to you about that. So so what is your perspective on this is really difficult to kind of formulate this, but like the soul versus the oneness and how we're parts, yet we are the one thing. If
Mhm.
you got to call it a thing, it's not a thing. But we also are this soul, and
Mhm.
somehow I'm different to you in that regard, yet we are
Yep.
the same. So it's kind of like paradoxical and very
Yep.
difficult to talk about. How would you, yeah, how would you even begin to try and talk about that? I know it's very
Describe
difficult
that.
to, yeah.
So I'll use an analogy, not to be taken literally, but it's an analogy to help us understand and comprehend how we can be both at the same time. A lot of times people like to refer to God as a white light, this bright light, heavenly light. So I'm going to use that as the basis for this analogy. Imagine that the oneness is that bright light. It's pure, unfiltered white light. And then imagine that each one of our souls is like a prism. And when that white light goes through a prism, it refracts a rainbow of colors. Now, the colors are still white light. When you put them all back together, they're all still part of one. But yet, when they're refracted through this prism, you can see the individual nature of how it is reflected. So imagine the soul as the prism and imagine the physical body as the color that gets represented from that prism. The soul itself acts as a way to create an individual experience, a, a way to say that I am different than you and you're different than somebody else. You're red, I'm blue, somebody else is yellow, just for the sake of the analogy. At some point, this physical existence goes away. We all, at some point, no longer exist physically. That doesn't mean that the white light ever goes away. The white light remains, even if the prism and where the prism was reflecting the individual color is no longer able to reflect that color into the physical experience. It can then turn itself, if it would like, and reflect it into something else. So we are still all part of one, but yet we are all individual when you take it and refract it, if you will. And when our physical body goes away, the light doesn't go away. It just returns back to the oneness.
Mhm. Yeah. So we all are. Yeah, that's really beautifully put, by the way. That's a really beautiful metaphor, to help people understand because it is a very tricky thing to talk about, isn't it? Because
Mhm.
it's so, um, yeah, it's just so outside of like the mind's typical understanding of things. It has to be one or the other. You're either
Mhm.
God or you're an individual. It's like, um, it's that feeling when did you feel you were the oneness at the same time as you were you could say the prism? Um,
Mhm.
do you feel like you simultaneously were both at the same time, or did you feel more towards?
Initially, so when I was still in, I guess, physical reality and hovering over my body, physical body in the dental chair, I definitely had a sense of individuality. I knew that there was this greater aspect to myself than my physical body, but I had not yet become a part of the oneness that happened when I went to the other side. When I went to the other side, again, without trying to put labels of time on it, I initially had my individuality, but it dissolved away as I expanded into the oneness. So, this expansion, it was almost like that individual aspect of myself was there. And I'm sure at any point in time, if I had wanted to be curious about what that life was, I could have connected back to the life of Anastasia, the physical life, because it was available there. But I was no longer limited to that. I was now a part of all soul experiences, all the knowing, all, and not even just, this is what blows a lot of people's like mind in trying to comprehend the scale of this. But our universe, our reality as we understand it, you think about the millions and billions and trillions of stars and planets that are in this physical universe. And think about all of the different likely life forms and opportunities there are to have an experience, a soul experience, just throughout this universe. Now, that scale in and of itself is unfathomable. The scale and size of our own universe and all of that it contains we can't comprehend it. There's just no way. What makes it even more difficult is that this universe is one of millions and billions and trillions of universes that contain as many, if not more, experiences than what we have here. So the scale of what we can experience on a soul level is so big. The, 70 to 100 years of the average life here in a physical body, I mean, not even
Yeah.
that. It's a fraction of that. It's not
Mm.
even the blink of an eye. It is just the thought of a blink of an eye from the soul perspective. It is nothing in scale compared to all that we are. And when you have that knowing, when you have that comparison within you, you have touched that scale and you can understand it at the soul level, and you try to bring that back into a physical experience. That's a really hard knowing to integrate because, on one hand, day-to-day life becomes a little bit mundane in relation to that. You're like, okay, so I'm going to get up in the morning and go to work and I'm going to do these things. And in my lifespan, that is now that I know is like that. Um, why do that?
Yeah,
Why
yeah,
go
yeah.
through that? But that is a step that's necessary, I think, for people, whether they're having an NDE or an out of body experience or just a spiritually, I think they're called spiritually transformative experiences, STEs, regardless of what you're having. I think that awareness that there is kind of a monotony, a mundaneness to physical life is an important awareness to have because it allows you to then let go of that monotony and step into what it means to be a soul in a physical experience. It actually unshackles you, it frees you, it allows you to go, you know what, there's something that my soul came here to experience. And I now have the freedom to do that. I don't have to be tied to what is culturally or societally accepted. I can now follow something that is so much deeper and so much more truthful. And each of our souls are here to have a physical experience, but the physical experience that we want to have is going to be unique to each and every soul. And so when I connect back to that grandness, I can bring in that knowing. And so now I'm not living my life through an everyday. I'm living my life through this fullness of peace, love, and joy that is the soul. And I actually radiate that into all of my experiences. And now it doesn't matter what I do. I could be drinking my iced latte in the morning, and it's a spiritual experience because I'm doing it from the place of the soul, not doing from a place
Mm,
of, okay, I got to hurry up and get this done because I got to get to my next meeting. I got to go drop the kids off at school or pick them up or make this phone call. It's no longer about that. It's about something
yeah.
so infinitely larger. And I'll say one more thing kind of tied to this. And this is a very polarizing statement to some degree. So depending on, who's hearing this and their beliefs and background, it also means that when we leave this physical life, we are not limited to a heaven or a hell experience. So the doctrine or dogma in the belief system that is rooted in a lot of religion, that there is this sort of sorting system that happens in our afterlife based off of what we experience in this second of our soul, and that it ultimately infinitely determines our entire soul's existence for eternity, is, from my experience, completely misunderstood and inaccurate. There is the ability, if our soul wants to go experience a Christian heaven and a Christian hell. Can go experience any religion's belief systems because those realities exist. Because remember, the number of realities that exist are as infinite and large as the number of stars in our own universe here.
Mm,
We can experience it if we want to, but we don't have to. We literally can experience whatever we want to be curious about when we're on the other side. That experience is available to all of us. So it has nothing to do with how you live this life, but how you live this life may provide you with a it may provide you with a point of curiosity in the afterlife. So if you were, and I just use Christianity because that's the religion that I was a part of in my earlier life. And so I understand it and know it. So if you believe that there's a Jesus, a Savior, a Christian heaven, and when you cross over, you have that point of curiosity, you can be taken to it to experience it. But does that
mhm,
mean that's the only point of curiosity available for every single soul that has ever existed? Absolutely not.
mhm. Um, I've heard it said by some others that on death you may face some of your own creations or your own fears and stuff like that. As a way of kind of you have to integrate that before you can maybe go into the realms you're talking about of unconditional love and complete connection to the oneness. Um, how does that perspective lie with you? What do you make of
Mhm.
that? Is that something that seems that would happen, or is that um,
So I believe what they are called. Okay, so I'm going to answer this, but I'm going to give a little preface to this. So if I had answered this question before I had heard other people's stories about distressing NDEs, I would say it's available. That experience is available if a soul wants to have it. Now, why would a soul want to have that? That's the part that I wouldn't be able to answer. But what I will say now is that there is that element of individuality that exists when we first cross over before it dissolves into the oneness, is guided by our curiosity. It is got our curiosities are guided by our beliefs. And so if there is a belief that is deeply rooted within our experience in a physical life, that belief may be one of the first curiosities that presents itself until you have an opportunity to expand beyond it on the other side. I will never discount any other NDE's story. So the people that have had these distressing NDEs, while their experience for them is completely valid, just like every other NDE experience is valid. What I will say that I've at least heard from all the ones I've heard now over the last 5 years, is they all still end with this access to love. They all still conclude that distressing experience with this awareness that they are unconditional love and they have access to it. So, putting those two together from my experience and what I've heard, it fits that if we want to be curious about that in the afterlife, whether we consciously are aware of the fact that our curiosities are guiding our experience is another story. That becomes part of the awareness of what happens when we expand into that oneness, when we expand into the all-knowing. But we always have the ability to go, but I want to experience something else. I'm curious what it would be experienced to be saved from this, to be part of unconditional love. And then your curiosity will lead you to your next experience. You know, having had this experience and bringing it back into my physical life and my physical mind, and being able to change how I live my life and feel like I am now living a completely different experience than I was 5 years ago. A lot of NDEers will say their line in life is pre-NDE and post-NDE, and that's so very, very true. There is this curiosity that I have, that are we all having these experiences now? So many people are having them, and we have the access to share this information with each other. Is it giving us the tools to know how to approach the afterlife when we cross over? Because, like religion tells you that there's a heaven and a hell. So it's almost like that. Christian religion, again, I don't want to discount that there are, thousands of religions out there. So religion gives us the kind of a framework of a knowing of what to be curious about when we first cross over. But what if there's a deeper knowledge that we can gain in our physical lives that is going to aid us when we cross over, so that our ability for our soul to be curious about things that are far greater, far more interesting, far more unique to the physical life? What if we're just evolving finally to the point to where we can understand that, and our physical experience, our physical minds have evolved enough. We've got enough basis and foundational understanding that we could go, you know what, there's more for us to share with each other in this physical life. So that way, when we get through this life and we get to the other side, we know, hey, when I first cross over, oh, I should be curious about everything. I should be curious about the things that are most important for me, not just wondering and being fearful of, well, am I going to go to this place or am I going to go to that place?
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask. It sounds like there wasn't any fear in your experience at all.
No,
So
not
just
even a little
was it
bit.
even an option? Was it like one of those things that you couldn't even feel like fear could even? Because I've had experiences where it's almost it's really bizarre, where fear just doesn't feel like it exists on a certain, when you get to a certain level of reality or something. I can't really explain it. Did you have that experience where fear just couldn't even seem to touch you where you were?
No. So the way I've come to describe this is there are feelings versus emotions. And feelings are the element or the essence of the soul that we can experience in a physical body. I've come to kind of bucket these into 4 core soul feelings: peace, love, joy, and grief. And we could talk about grief because everybody raises their eyebrows like, grief is a soul experience. Yeah, it absolutely is.
Oh, wow.
But fear is not. Fear is an emotion. Excitement, elation, these things that we experience as a chemical reaction in our biology is tied to our physical experience. When we step out of the physical chemical reactions that our soul's picking up from a sensory tool, it no longer has that connection. Because remember, our physical body is a sensory tool. Our soul is picking up all of the senses. And so fear absolutely is part of our senses. Our biology, our physiology is going to react to that. We're going to feel our muscles tighten. We're going to feel that welling up inside of us. That doesn't happen at the soul level, because the soul is not the physical body. That resides in the physical body only. It doesn't reside on the soul level. And so when you move into the soul level, you do have peace, you do have love, you do have joy, and the grief. This is the best way that I could describe grief isn't that your soul? Because when people hear that, they think, oh, that means that I'm either going to experience love or grief. They bring it back to this very dualistic, and it's non-dualistic. It's very much not black and white. There is a spectrum of experiences, and the grief, the best way I can describe this is your soul acknowledging that it is has not become completely connected to everything that it wants to be. So the soul expanding into the oneness and feeling any limitations to that, sort of being in between the physical body and the oneness. So the soul not realizing it can expand into that to be connected to everything, it can experience a level of grief. And so the way that it shows up for us in this physical life is when we grieve, like when we truly grieve, not the emotion of suffering, but when we truly grieve on a soul level, there is actually an expansive feeling that happens with that. It is our essence trying to expand out to connect back to that thing that we feel like is not a part of us. That is like a soul failsafe that goes, wait a minute, there's more, there's a connection here that I'm longing for, and I'm going to expand back into it until I connect back into the peace, love, and joy that I know is connected to that curiosity. So it's not a state of suffering, it's not a punishment, it's not something that we are destined or fated to experience. I like to think of it more as a failsafe for our soul to not let it sit in a place of lack, of not being part of the oneness. Um, I don't have any beliefs tied to, souls that are earthbound and don't cross over or vice versa. Um, but I think there is an element of that from the soul perspective. When it longs to be a part of that oneness, it magnetizes it to fully cross over so that it can be a part of peace, love, and joy once again.
That's beautiful. Yeah, as I've never heard grief spoken about like that. So thank you for sharing that. Um, yeah, it does feel like it's the thing about fear is it's so convincing when you're in a human body, it's so convincing. Like it's so convincing on it
Yeah.
what it's saying and like its belief systems and everything. It just feels like, and then it projects, I've found anyway, my own experience, it projects that onto, oh, this is what I'm going to experience when I die, this kind of fear that I'm going to face.
Yeah.
It's it's nice to hear that that's not the case. Um,
And I like to make the comparison that our physical body without the soul, so really drawing this clear distinction between the physical body is a sensory tool for the soul, but the physical body needs to recognize the fact that the soul is one of the sensory inputs. So we have, sight and sound and taste, we've got touch and smell. But our soul, which is our intuitive self, it's our wholeness, it's the part of us that is complete. When we can acknowledge that that is actually the leading sense in this physical body, when our intuition and our heart, which is where that really connects to, is truly our primary sense to follow, then fear dissipates, because fear and the soul cannot live together. And when we don't have the soul as the primary sense or the primary driver of our physical body, then our physical body relies on its mind. It relies on what it knows, what it's experienced. And our mind is completely programmed from a biology perspective to seek pleasure and safety and to avoid risk and pain. And so when we're only operating by the mind, all we can do is take all the things that our physical body has experienced to say, this is what we believe is going to lead us to safety and pleasure. And here's all the things that my physical body has experienced that tell me this is what I need to do to avoid pain. And depending on both the combination of your genetics of what has been handed down from your ancestors' experiences and your own experiences, your sensitivity from a nervous system perspective to pain could be so heightened that your defense mechanism kicks in to the degree that you just fear and anxiety all the time. It is just there to keep you safe. because
Mhm.
that's what your body does. It wants to keep you safe. And so the physical experience, when led by just the mind, is only going to act and react to what it knows. It's a closed circuit. It's just this physical reality. But when you allow the sense of the soul in, your knowing expands beyond the physical reality. Your knowing expands to something far greater. And when you know that as a sense, then your mind has that as another input and goes, oh, that's right. This is what I know now. And this is something, if I follow my intuition, this is going to lead me to greater pleasure and safety. And it's also because our soul is there for us to experience the unconditional love that we are. We also know then that it leads us away from the things that we are afraid of.
Beautifully put. Quick question. I was just curious about this. So did you became part of the oneness, and so obviously it's a multiplicity of souls that make up, from my understanding of what you said, it's a multiplicity of souls that make up the oneness
Mhm.
that we are. It's like one big, as opposed to it being one singular I, it's more like an us, like it's an I slash us, you could say. Did you, in that place, did you interact with any other souls, or was it more that you were just having your kind of connection experience to everything?
I I do not consciously remember connecting, but I also, to any specific soul or seeing souls or spirits or guides or angels, I didn't have that kind of experience. One, in part because I was in complete darkness, I was in the void. And I do also want to add to the fact that when I say the word void, what I mean by that is the void means that it is the place where there cannot be anything that isn't complete. So it is the void of all things incomplete. So it sounds like it's backward, but the void is completeness because it is void of anything not complete. Um, I also acknowledge that there are there is an infinite number of things that I connected to that I wasn't able to bring back, both in terms of knowing and understanding. And I think this is part of what, now that it's been several years, I've heard that other NDEers have talked about like this integration phase. There is this period of time where you're just so hungry to understand what happened. But then there's the next phase, which is integration. And then there's sort of this application of it. But from my experience, I believe that I'm going to be integrating, and I hate the word downloading. I don't like it, but for the purpose of this, it kind of fits, like downloading it to the degree that as I begin to understand one fundamental piece, I then can be able to understand the next piece. And as I go through life, that understanding is growing. The knowing of that is growing, and having access to the things that I connected to that I wasn't initially able to bring back because I couldn't comprehend it. Little by little, small little drop by little drop, it becomes understood in my physical mind. Um, I like to draw the comparison between, like, imagine a society that existed 30,000 years ago and assumed they had no advanced technology. And that society lived in, mud huts, and, they had stone buildings, no electricity, no advanced engineering, no anything that we have today. And if you or I were to go back in time to that civilization and talk about a cell phone, they'd have no idea. They wouldn't even have a concept of
Right.
communication at all over any device, let alone something that would be, like, I can be standing here and you can be standing over in the UK, and we could be talking to each other, and there would be no basis for them. So they wouldn't even be able to comprehend that. There would be no value in even trying to share that technology or
Mhm.
that knowing with that civilization without giving them a whole lot before that to build the foundation of understanding.
Yeah, that makes a lot
That
of
is the
sense.
same thing that I feel is happening with us, understanding the other side, of what we're bringing back, all these NDEers, all of these spiritual experiences that people are sharing with each other. It's building the basis of understanding for us as humanity, as we stand right now, to bring that knowing up to another level so that we can get closer and closer and closer to understanding the infinite nature of the soul in this physical experience. So we could literally be a soul completely embodied in our physical experience, completely connected to that knowing on the other side while having the joy and bliss of a physical experience, sensory experience at the same time.
That sounds fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. It isn't fantastic right now, but I'm looking forward to how things might change. That makes a lot of sense as well. But that's what would happen, you know. That's like
Mhm.
it seems like a hell of a lot of people are having these experiences now, and obviously
Yeah.
there are more people sharing them because more people are aware of it. But yeah, that we would get closer to that place. You'd think that's what the soul wants, like to fully embody itself in the human being on Earth. That's
I I have often said that if I were to write like a book or a movie or a screenplay, something that really would kind of venture to why our soul is having this physical experience, it's to evolve the biology, the understanding, the mental capacity of our this physical vehicle, generation after generation, evolving it to the point to where the soul can come in and have a fully integrated physical experience, bringing all of the knowing of exactly who we are into our physical body. Because right now, most of us walk around having no clue that there's something beyond this physical experience.
yes, that makes a lot of sense. It makes it worth it as well. Like all the stuff we've
Mhm.
been through, it's like, oh yeah, okay, it's we're working towards something. It's not just painful for no reason. We're working
Yeah,
towards something.
agreed.
Um, just before we're out of time, I just wanted to get round to what we were talking about earlier and how this has affected your life. I've heard you talk on another podcast about how it basically completely got rid of your social anxiety, which as someone
Uh-huh.
with social anxiety, that sounds very, very good. Um, so yeah, can you talk a little bit just how it obviously about that and how it's affected your life in general and sort of how it compares to your life previously?
Yeah, initially, right after I had the experience, it was all consuming because I needed to understand it. It was, I think it's our physical nature to try to put things in a box and define it and put words to it. And that's the way that we can kind of make sense of things that we can't make sense of. And I come to appreciate the fact that there's a lot of this that I will be trying to make sense of for the rest of my life. It's that building the foundation of knowing as time goes on. Um, there is a shift that happened within me personally. I can't speak for other NDEers, but that happened within me personally when I connected to the fact that I am a part of this all knowing oneness. I also knew that if any one soul didn't exist, that oneness as itself could not exist. We absolutely are all a part of it. That was without a doubt a very clear knowing for me. And with that connection, suddenly how I saw myself was no longer this physical person that had strengths and weaknesses and things that I did well or things that I didn't do well. It no longer became this running list of, am I doing life right? Am I getting everything done? Am I, checking all these boxes that I'm supposed to check? Am I being the best version of myself that I can possibly be? And because my physical nature is one of, I'm a highly motivated perfectionist I was to some degree. um, Whenever I felt like I fell short on something, it created anxiety in me. And so I carried the burden of all of those shortcomings inside my perceived shortcomings. And so the social anxiety was really triggered by this thought of everybody around me knows my shortcomings too. Like they can see it. They can see it as clearly as I can see it, even though it might be a complete stranger who just met me. Because that's the nature of social anxiety. We project out this feeling of not being worthy, and we assume that all other people are going to see the same thing that we judge of ourselves. But when I realized I was already complete, and that the only thing that I need to do is to bring that completeness into this physical life. Suddenly, every interaction became about radiating that, being that oneness, being that love, being that unconditional nature of who I am. And when you have that mindset shift that you are not your physical body, but you're something far greater. And if you allow that far greater aspect to come forth, there is absolutely there's no success in this world that can create a completed feeling that is more awe-inspiring and loving. And the word comes to mind, satisfying from a physical perspective,
Mhm.
than to be exactly who you are, your truest soul self. That is the most complete and satisfying and adventurous thing that you can experience in a physical life. And so with that, social anxiety was gone. It just couldn't exist anymore, because what drove it was no longer my mindset. It was this understanding of who I really was. And with that also came, this sort of idea of climbing a corporate ladder. At the time, I was a vice president in a company, and I had all of this, corporate and professional goal throughout my entire life to climb the corporate ladder. And I was in line to move into, at some point, CEO, to be considered for that anyway. And no longer my job, my profession, the things that I was striving for in that profession no longer mattered. What mattered
Wow.
was to be true to myself, to really be the most authentic version of myself so that my soul could be in the driver's seat, and to listen to my intuition. And my intuition led me to resigning from my corporate life. Um, I opened up a wellness studio actually a couple years before, but what I had decided, and it was sort of one of those things I was doing as a little bit of a passion project, but I quit my corporate job. I put everything, all of my resources into a wellness studio. The one aspect of wellness that resonates with me so very deeply from my experience is the idea of energy, because energy is the soul. And so things like vibrational healing, Reiki, and reflexology, all of these elements of how we can connect to the aspects of ourselves that's bigger than our physical body, became my focus. That was what I had to put out in the world. So yeah, I did a 180 and never looked back.
Yeah, that's a huge shift, isn't it? That's
It
amazing.
is.
Go from almost CEO to doing all this
Yes.
healing work. That's incredible. So very last question. Obviously, we're almost out of time, but just to say, is there any websites or anything you'd like to share about your work that you do, or
Mhm.
anything like that, or uh, email contacts or anything you'd like to share for people to reach out if they wanted to?
Sure.
Um,
So I am pretty active with sharing kind of my understanding and knowings as they unfold on my personal TikTok account. It's at the Heart Shines. The wellness center that we've opened in the suburbs of Chicago. You can find all the details about that at thehealingheart.com. I don't really have any other ventures out there. I don't have a book or a course or anything that I have to offer. And I feel like it's so important that, for me anyways, that when I share this experience, that it really stands alone, that people hear it for what it is and not hear it as this is something that's going to lead them to something else for them to commercially engage in. Because I think, for me, obviously my experience led me to all of these other aspects that I just shared with our studio, and how I tell my story. But that was my path. And so I really want people to hear the story for what it is, and not feel that it's leading them any other way, other than to just know that they are complete, that there are no lessons to learn in this physical life, and their ability to connect to peace, love, and joy at every opportunity possible is going to be the key to them connecting more directly to their soul.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for talking with me, Anastasia. That was really, really enjoyable, and I loved hearing about your experiences and your perspective on everything. That's great. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's a great conversation.
Thank you.